I died in my own kitchen. And the strange part is, I remember every second of it. The cold floor. The fading heartbeat. The feeling of my soul slipping out of my chest like smoke. And then, silence. A silence so deep it swallowed every fear I ever had. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in a hospital. I wasn't in my house. I was standing in a place where time didn't breathe, a place made of light and truth. And he was there. Not a vision. Not a dream. Jesus himself, calling me by my name like he had known me my entire life. He looked into me, not at me, and said, "You do not understand what your life could have been, but I will show you." I thought he would reveal my sins, my regrets, my wasted years. But instead, he showed me the 7 stages of semen retention, and the man I was meant to become. And trust me, nothing in life prepares you for the moment Jesus tells you the truth about your own masculinity. I never imagined death would come for me on such an ordinary morning. I thought it would arrive with warnings, with long hospital stays, with goodbyes whispered through tired smiles. But no. It came quietly, like a thief slipping into a house where the door was left unlocked. I was standing in my kitchen, the smell of weak coffee filling the air, sunlight barely touching the floor, and I remember thinking, another simple day, nothing special. If only I had known. My heart had been acting strange for weeks, but you know how old men are, we ignore our bodies until they shout. That morning, the shout finally came. A tightness gripped my chest, sharper than anything I'd ever felt, almost like a fist made of cold iron twisting inside me. I leaned on the counter, trying to breathe, but the world was shrinking around me. The radio kept playing, the kettle kept boiling, but everything felt far away, like I was watching my own life through a window. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. My vision blurred, colors smearing into one another. I tried to call for help, I really did, but my voice came out as a dry whisper swallowed by the empty house. There is nothing more frightening than realizing your body no longer obeys you. My legs gave out first. Then my hands. Then everything. I hit the ground harder than I expected, the tile cold against my cheek, the scent of spilled coffee growing stronger as the mug shattered nearby. Strangely, the panic didn't come. Not immediately. What came first was regret, the kind that presses on your ribs like a weight. I thought of my son, of how we hadn't spoken properly in months. I thought of my grandson, drifting through life lost and exhausted, glued to screens, his eyes dimmer every year. I thought of all the things I wished I'd told him about being a man, about strength, about discipline, about the battles nobody talks about. But time had run out. My hearing faded next. The ticking clock quieted. The kettle stopped its noise. Even my heartbeat grew faint, like someone slowly turning down a radio dial. And then came the silence, thick, absolute, terrifying in its perfection. In that silence, a strange warmth spread across my body, almost as if someone had placed a blanket over my fading spirit. I knew, without anyone telling me, that I was dying. And I couldn't escape the truth of it. My breaths grew shallow, like my lungs were forgetting how to work. Every exhale felt final. My thoughts became slow and heavy, drifting between memories I hadn't visited in decades. My wedding day. The smell of my wife's perfume. The day my son was born. The laughter we'd once shared before life made everything complicated. And then, the darker memories, the failures I tried to bury. Death has a cruel way of bringing everything back into focus. But the strangest thing happened. Right when I thought fear would swallow me whole, something inside me relaxed. It was as if my spirit had accepted a truth my body refused to understand. The pain faded. The worry faded. Even the regret felt like it was slipping off me, thread by thread. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was drifting. And drifting feels a lot like floating. Then the world went black around the edges. Not a harsh darkness, but a soft one, like curtains gently closing after a long play. I didn't hear my final heartbeat. I didn't feel the last breath leave my chest. Instead, it was as if someone flipped a switch, and the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. I felt lighter than I had in years, decades even. Freer than any moment I could remember. And just when everything vanished, the kitchen, the floor, the pain, the memories, another sensation emerged. It wasn't sight, nor sound, nor touch. It was awareness. Pure awareness. I was still me, but without the heaviness of a body dragging behind. I hovered in a space that didn't feel like Earth, yet didn't feel entirely like heaven either. Something was waiting. And as I floated in that vast stillness, a stillness more real than anything I'd ever known, a single question filled my mind. What happens now? Little did I know. Someone was about to answer. I don't know how long I drifted in that weightless silence. It could have been a second. It could have been a century. Time doesn't behave the same way once your body is gone. All I knew was that I existed, not as flesh, not as bone, but as something aware, something awake in a way I had never been in life. At first, there was nothing but stillness, the kind of stillness that presses on your soul more than your ears. And then, something changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't alone. It felt like the air, if there even was air, shifted. Not with movement, but with meaning. Imagine standing in a room with your back turned and suddenly knowing someone entered, even without hearing a step. That's what it felt like. A presence stronger than any human presence I'd ever known. It didn't frighten me. It humbled me. Made me feel smaller and larger at the same time, like I was being seen fully for the first time in my life. A glow formed ahead of me, soft at first, like dawn breaking through fog. It didn't hurt my eyes, even though I no longer had eyes in the way we understand them. The light felt alive. It breathed. It pulsed. And from inside that living brightness, a figure began to emerge. No wings. No thunder. No theatrics. Just a man, or at least the shape of one, walking toward me as though he had been expecting me for a very long time. I knew who he was before I could think, before I could reason. Recognition washed over me like warm water. It wasn't the kind of recognition you have when you see a celebrity or read a name in a book. It was something deeper, older, woven into the fabric of whatever my soul had become. He didn't look exactly like the paintings. His features weren't exaggerated or dramatic. But his presence left no doubt. It was him. Jesus. He said my name. Not out loud. Not with lips. But directly into the core of whatever I was now. And the way he said it, gentle, patient, almost affectionate, made something inside me break. In life, most people say your name without meaning it. Some say it with annoyance. Some forget it altogether. But he said it like he had held it for ages, like it was precious to him. I felt myself crumble, not from shame, but from the weight of being known so completely. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I didn't have knees anymore. I wanted to reach for him, but I didn't have hands. What surprised me most was this. He didn't radiate judgment. Not even a hint of disappointment. Instead, what I felt coming from him was understanding. As if he had witnessed every mistake I ever made, every weakness, every struggle, and still saw something in me worth speaking to. Worth calling back. Worth saving. He stepped closer, and the light around him shifted, becoming warmer, almost embracing. "It's not your time," he said. And those 5 words changed everything. I felt confusion rising in me. Why bring me here then? Why let my heart stop? Why show me this? But before I could form a single question, he answered the one I hadn't even spoken aloud yet. There is something you must see. Something men have forgotten. Something they desperately need to remember. A part of me resisted. I was nothing more than an old man with too many regrets and too little wisdom. Who was I to be shown anything? I tried to explain that I wasn't a pastor, I wasn't educated, I wasn't the kind of man anyone listened to. But he smiled, a real smile, soft and amused, like he'd heard that excuse 1,000 times. "That is exactly why it must be you," he said. "Men are no longer listening to the ones who preach. They will listen to someone who lived." His words hit me harder than the heart attack ever did. He wasn't choosing me because I was special. He was choosing me because I was ordinary. Because I knew what it felt like to fail. To get tired. To watch the younger men in my family crumble under pressures they didn't understand. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't just talking about physical weakness or exhaustion. He was talking about something deeper, something spiritual, something vital that men were losing without noticing. Then he lifted his hand, and the space around us began to shift, as if the very fabric of reality were unfolding like pages of a book. "I will show you," he said. "The stages every man walks through when he stops wasting what I placed inside him and begins to honor it." His voice filled the entire realm we stood in, calm, steady, undeniable. And as the light reshaped itself around us, I braced myself, not knowing that what he was about to reveal would change everything I believed about strength, about manhood, and about life itself. The moment Jesus lifted his hand, the entire space around us shifted. It was like standing inside a still lake and suddenly watching ripples move across the water, except the ripples weren't on the surface, they were in reality itself. Colors I'd never seen before folded in on themselves, stretching and bending like fabric caught in a gentle wind. I felt something pulling me forward, not physically, but spiritually, like my soul recognized it was being shown something it had waited decades to understand. I didn't know what was happening. I only knew we were leaving that calm, bright space and entering somewhere else entirely. It wasn't heaven, and it certainly wasn't earth. It felt like a bridge between what men see and what they refuse to see. My spirit trembled, not with fear, but with a strange anticipation, like when you're young and someone tells you they're about to show you a secret that will change everything. Jesus stood beside me, calm, steady, patient, like he had done this countless times before. "Do not resist," he said, though I hadn't spoken a word. "What I'm about to show you is not punishment, it is understanding." His voice echoed softly, not in the air, but inside the deepest part of me. I felt my old pride crumble again. When you stand before truth itself, there's no point pretending you have it all figured out. And as those words settled in my soul, the shifting space crystallized into something clearer. At first, I thought I was seeing my old kitchen again. The counters, the stove, the cracked tile near the sink, every detail appeared exactly as I remembered. But then I noticed something. It wasn't me standing in that kitchen. It was a younger version of myself, maybe 30 years old, shoulders straighter, eyes brighter, full of the kind of energy I didn't even realize I'd lost over the years. The sight hit me like a punch. I had forgotten that man ever existed. I looked at Jesus, confused, but he simply nodded toward the scene unfolding before us. "This is not your past," he said softly. "This is the version of yourself you never became." My breath, or whatever my soul used as breath, caught. The disappointment that washed over me was sharp, almost painful. I saw that younger me move with purpose, with confidence, with a kind of quiet strength I always admired in other men but never managed to cultivate in myself. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, feeling suddenly exposed, almost ashamed. Jesus stepped closer, his light dimming just enough so that I could look directly at him. "Because you believed weakness was part of your nature," he said. "But weakness came from the way you used your strength, not from who you were created to be." His words cut with gentleness, but they still cut deeply. I realized then that I had spent a lifetime wasting something precious without ever knowing it. The scene shifted again. Now I saw countless men, some young, some old, all moving through their lives with the same tired eyes, the same heaviness I had seen in my grandson. Jesus didn't need to explain. I understood it instantly. These were men drained by the world, by addiction, by distraction, by the quiet battles nobody talks about. Men who believed they were broken when, in truth, they were simply empty. Empty because they had been pouring out their energy without ever learning its value. A warm light rested on my shoulder, his hand. "Men lose their strength long before they lose their age," he said. "And they blame everything except the truth. They were never taught what their strength really is." I felt something inside me unravel, like a knot pulled loose after years of tightening. My entire life, I thought age had taken my vigor. But maybe age had only revealed a weakness I had been nurturing since youth. Then Jesus said something that made the entire space tremble faintly. "You will not return with theories," he said. "You will return with understanding. And men will listen because you speak not as a perfect man, but as a man who finally saw the truth." The compassion in his voice undid me. My eyes would have filled with tears if I still had eyes to fill. I wasn't chosen because I was strong. I was chosen because I had lived the consequences of not being strong. The kitchen faded. The younger me disappeared. The men vanished. And once again, it was just Jesus and me standing in that strange living light. "Are you ready?" he asked, not with force, but with a sincerity that made refusing impossible. My spirit trembled, but I nodded. Because even though I didn't understand everything yet, I could feel it. He was about to show me something that would change not only my life, but the lives of the men I loved. And as the space around us opened like a door into the unknown, I realized this wasn't just revelation. It was an invitation. An invitation to finally understand what I had been missing my entire life. The moment Jesus opened that doorway of light, the world around us shifted again, and suddenly I was standing in a dim, quiet room. It wasn't any room I recognized, yet it felt painfully familiar, like the kind of place where men lose themselves slowly, without noticing. A bed unmade. A desk cluttered. A phone glowing in a corner like a small, hungry demon. And sitting in the middle of it all was a man. Not a stranger. Not a younger me. Just a man representing millions. Shoulders slumped. Eyes tired. Spirit emptied. Jesus didn't need to explain. I felt the truth the moment I saw him. "This," he said quietly, "is the first stage. The wasting." The words echoed inside me, heavy as stone. The man looked alive, but barely. Everything about him was drained, his posture, his breath, the way his hands trembled as he held his phone. It wasn't sickness. It wasn't age. It was depletion. The slow leaking of something vital, something God-given, something he didn't even know he was losing. I stepped closer, watching the man scroll mindlessly, his eyes glazed over. I could almost feel the heaviness inside him, the fog, the exhaustion, the emptiness. It was like watching a candle burn with no flame left, only smoke. Jesus spoke again, his tone filled with more sorrow than anger. "Every time he indulges, every time he wastes what I placed inside him, he weakens not only his body, but his purpose." His words hit me like truth I should have known a long time ago. A sudden wave of grief swept over me as I watched the man collapse onto his bed, staring at the ceiling with that expression I'd seen in my grandson 100 times, lost, tired, directionless. "Most men believe they are lazy," Jesus said, "when in truth they are drained." I swallowed hard. How many times had I blamed myself for being weak, for losing drive, for fading as a man, when all along I had been leaking my strength without understanding its value. Jesus continued, his voice steady but firm. "This stage is where the world keeps them. Exhausted. Spent. Running on fumes." The man on the bed closed his eyes, breathing shallowly, like even rest couldn't reach him. And for the first time, I felt something piercing my heart. Not fear, not confusion, but recognition. I had been this man. My son had been this man. My grandson was becoming this man. Men everywhere were quietly dying long before their bodies ever did. Then Jesus showed me something even more painful. The man stood up and tried to face the day, but his body moved like it weighed twice as much. His steps were slow, his shoulders drooped, his gaze unfocused. "When a man wastes his essence," Jesus said, "his spirit dims. His mind dulls. His ambition collapses." I could see it clearly now, the limp handshake, the weak voice, the constant exhaustion. Signs I thought were aging were actually depletion. The scene shifted slightly, showing flashes of the man's life, arguments with his partner, unfulfilled goals, unfinished projects, dreams abandoned halfway. Every disappointment carried the same root: lack of energy. Not motivation. Not discipline. Energy. Pure masculine fire that had been poured out without purpose. "He thinks he is failing at life," Jesus said softly, "but life is failing to grow in him because he no longer has fuel." I felt anger rising inside me, not at the man, but at myself, at society, at everything that had lied to us about what strength really is. Jesus touched my shoulder gently, calming the storm inside me. "Men were created to build, protect, lead, create," he said. "But they cannot do these things without the strength I placed within them. And when that strength is wasted, the man suffers first. Then everyone who depends on him suffers too." The room grew darker, colder, as the man curled up, covering his face with his hands. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet despair, the kind that corrodes a soul over many years. "This stage," Jesus whispered, "is where the enemy wants them to remain. Weak. Confused. Ashamed. too exhausted to rise, too drained to fight. His words trembled through me, and suddenly I understood, this wasn't just physical loss. It was a spiritual robbery generations deep. And as Jesus stepped forward, the room shook with a faint pulse of light. "But the first stage is not the end," he said. "It is only the doorway. No man stays weak once he understands what he is losing and why." The man on the bed lifted his head slightly, as if hearing some distant call. A spark, tiny but real, flickered in his eyes. And Jesus looked at me with meaning so deep I felt it in my bones. "This," he said, "is where transformation begins." When the room faded, the next place Jesus showed me felt heavier, like walking into a dream you can't quite wake up from. Everything was muted, the colors washed out, the air thick as if it were filled with dust only the spirit could sense. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was the same man. Older now, or maybe just more defeated. His eyes were half open, unfocused, wandering through nothing. I knew instantly, this was not exhaustion anymore. This was the fog. Jesus stood beside me, his expression solemn. "This is where men lose themselves without knowing they're lost," he said. The man moved slowly, almost robotically, as if his mind and body had become strangers. His phone buzzed, but he didn't react. The world around him could have been burning and he wouldn't have noticed. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere numb. As I watched him shuffle through his day like a ghost, I felt a cold recognition spreading through my chest. The fog wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was silent, and that made it all the more dangerous. The man stared blankly at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, and I saw nothing in his eyes. No spark. No direction. Just a dull emptiness. When a man wastes himself repeatedly, Jesus explained, his mind loses clarity. The ability to focus, to dream, to fight, becomes buried under haze. And I understood it. I had lived years inside that haze without knowing the name of it. The scene shifted, showing him trying to read a book, failing. Opening a work project, failing. Beginning a prayer, failing. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. His mind kept slipping away like sand falling through trembling fingers. I felt my throat tighten. How many times had I blamed myself for having a weak mind, when the truth was that my mind was suffocating under years of depletion? Jesus stepped forward, and the light from his presence pushed the fog back just a little. "Men call this laziness," he said. "But laziness is a choice. This," he motioned toward the man staring blankly at a screen, "is the inability to choose." The words hit me deep. The fog wasn't weakness, it was malfunction. A dimming of the inner lamp God placed in every man at birth. A lamp that can't shine when drained of the oil it needs. The man sat at his desk, head in his hands, overwhelmed by nothing and everything at the same time. "A fogged mind can't plan," Jesus said. "It can't focus. It can't resist temptation. It can't build. It can't pray." His voice was gentle, but the truth behind it was sharp. Men think they lack discipline, but what they lack is clarity. I watched the man sigh, slump deeper, scrolling aimlessly to escape the very numbness he was trapped in. It was a vicious loop, self-made but not self-understood. I saw his relationships suffer next. Conversations where he wasn't present. Promises he forgot. Projects he never finished. People thinking he didn't care, when the truth was much sadder, he couldn't feel. Fog doesn't just blur the mind, it dulls the heart. The man looked at his partner as she spoke to him, and his eyes drifted away, not from disinterest but from incapacity. And my heart ached for every man I knew who had lived like that, including myself. Jesus touched my arm gently. "The fog convinces him that life is meaningless," he said. "That dreams are foolish, that hope is unrealistic, that he is destined to fail." The man sat down on the edge of his bed, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor as if searching for something he'd dropped years ago. I knew that posture. I had lived that posture. It was the posture of a man whose spirit has become too heavy for his thoughts to carry. But then, just for a moment, the man blinked and rubbed his eyes, as if a thin veil had moved. It didn't last long, but I saw it. A flicker. A moment of clarity. And Jesus nodded. "Even in the fog, truth tries to break through," he said. But the man does not understand what is happening to him, so he blames himself instead of the drain. Those words struck me hard. How many men crumble under shame, never realizing the enemy keeps them fogged precisely so they never fight. The room dimmed again, but something inside me had changed. I no longer looked at the fog with confusion, I looked at it with anger. Because I knew this stage well. Too well. And if this was stage 2, I could only imagine how much deeper the journey went. Jesus turned toward me, his gaze steady, almost preparing me. "The fog is only the beginning," he said. "Now you will see what comes next, when a man tries to escape but finds himself bound." And with that, the fog dissolved into darkness, and another vision began to form. The darkness that formed after the fog wasn't the peaceful kind. It wasn't silent or gentle. It felt tight, constricting, like the whole space had shrunk around us. And then I saw him again, the same man Jesus had been showing me, but now his posture had changed. He wasn't slumped or wandering in haze. He was struggling, fighting something I couldn't see at first. His breath was heavy, his jaw clenched, his fists pressed against the sides of his head. A man at war with himself. As I stepped closer, the darkness shifted, revealing something horrifyingly familiar. Chains. Not physical ones, but spiritual, thick, black, coiled around his chest, his mind, his wrists. They tightened every time he tried to think, every time he tried to pray, every time he tried to stand tall. He would pull against them, desperate, determined, shaking with effort, but they didn't budge. I could feel his panic, his frustration, his shame, emotions so raw they pierced me like knives. Jesus spoke softly, but his voice carried through the darkness with weight. "This is the stage where sin becomes slavery," he said. "Where a man no longer chooses, he obeys." The man collapsed to his knees, not from weakness, but from hopelessness. I recognized it instantly, that tortured feeling of wanting to stop but failing again and again. That moment when a man tells himself, "This is just who I am now," because he can't imagine ever breaking free. A new vision unfolded. I saw the man promising himself he'd change, promising that this time would be different. But every time temptation came, loneliness, stress, boredom, frustration, the chains pulled him backward with a force that seemed stronger than his own will. "He believes he lacks discipline," Jesus continued, "but what he truly lacks is freedom." And I understood. The man wasn't choosing to fall. He was being dragged. The scene grew even darker as Jesus revealed the source of the chains. Each link represented something: shame, past mistakes, hidden fears, the world's temptations, the enemy's whispers. And worst of all, hopelessness. "These chains tighten," Jesus said, "every time he falls and believes the lie that he cannot rise." The man cried out in frustration, not a loud scream, but a choked, silent, broken sob. The kind no one hears, because men are taught to suffer quietly. What struck me the hardest was how familiar it all felt. I remembered nights sitting alone, feeling like something owned me. Times when I told myself I could stop any time, but couldn't. Moments I pretended everything was fine because admitting the truth felt too heavy. "The enemy hides the chains," Jesus said. "He convinces the man that his prison is normal." My heart twisted. How many men live their whole lives believing captivity is just part of being male? The man tried again to stand, pulling with everything he had, shaking uncontrollably from the effort. And for a brief moment, one single link cracked, barely visible, but real. Jesus nodded toward it. "Every moment of resistance weakens the chains," he said. "But he does not see progress, so he gives up too soon." The man collapsed again, unaware that he had actually made progress. That broke me more than anything. Then Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder with a firmness that made the darkness tremble. "This," he said, "is where most men quit." The chains pulsed, tightening around the man until he could barely breathe. But if he endures, if he persists through this stage, he becomes someone the enemy fears. I felt that line hit me deep. Not something the enemy dislikes, something the enemy fears. The man lifted his head again, eyes swollen, breath shaking, spirit cracked, yet he tried once more. His hand rose a few inches before the chains yanked him back down. But Jesus didn't look disappointed. He looked proud. "Even in defeat, he fights," he said. And that means the chains are not permanent. A faint glow began forming around the man's chest, tiny, flickering, but unmistakably light. Hope, I realized. The first spark of it. And then Jesus stepped forward, his presence pushing the darkness back just enough for the man to see the chains wrapped around him. And that simple act, seeing them, changed everything. Awareness, Jesus said, is the beginning of victory. The room shook, the chains rattled, and the entire space opened like a curtain. Now, Jesus whispered, you will see what happens when a man awakens. The darkness dissolved, and something bright, fiercely bright, began to break through. The darkness tore open like a veil being lifted, and suddenly I was standing in a room filled with light. Not warm, gentle light like before, but the sharp, piercing kind that exposes everything. And there he was again, the same man from the stages before. Yet something in him had changed. His posture straighter, his breathing steadier, his eyes clearer. Not completely, but noticeably. The chains were still there, but they no longer owned him. Something new was rising inside him, like a soldier waking up after years of sleeping through the war of his own life. Jesus stepped forward, his voice carrying a different tone now, a tone of expectation, almost of pride. This, he said, is the awakening. The man stood in front of a mirror, staring at his own reflection as if seeing himself for the first time. Not with disgust, not with shame, but with something hesitant and unfamiliar, recognition. He was beginning to understand that the man he had become wasn't the man he was meant to be. I watched him close his eyes, clenching his fists as if refusing to fall back into the old cycle. His breathing was deep, intentional, the kind of breathing a man does when he chooses to face his own demons instead of running from them. Awakening, Jesus said softly, isn't strength, it's awareness. It's when a man realizes he has been asleep in a world that wanted him numb. And I saw it clearly. The fog was thinning, the chains loosening, not from force, but from clarity. The scene shifted, showing the man turning off his phone for the first time in years, deleting apps he once hid behind, stepping away from screens that drained him. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from unfamiliar freedom. He began tidying his room, small movements, almost symbolic. Folding clothes, making his bed, opening windows. And Jesus explained, a man cleans his surroundings when he begins cleaning his soul. These simple acts are the first signs of spiritual restoration. Then I saw him journaling, writing out thoughts he was too ashamed to say aloud. Confessions, regrets, promises, fears. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. Truth, Jesus said, is painful at first, but it is the medicine that begins healing the spirit. The man stopped writing at one point, tears streaming down his face, his shoulders shaking. But he didn't hide from it. He let himself feel everything he had avoided for years. And Jesus nodded. Awakening begins with honesty. Suddenly, a new vision appeared, the man watching videos about self-improvement, searching terms like semen retention, discipline, masculinity, purpose. His face changed as he listened, shock giving way to understanding, understanding giving way to determination. Knowledge was beginning to replace the years of confusion he'd lived under. Even the smallest spark of truth, Jesus said, can ignite a fire in a man who thought he had nothing left. I saw him trying, truly trying, to resist temptation. Some days he succeeded. Some days he failed. He would fall to his knees in frustration, but unlike before, he didn't stay there. He stood up again, cleaned himself up, tried the next day. And Jesus smiled gently. Progress does not look like perfection, he said. It looks like a man who refuses to surrender to the version of himself that was slowly killing him. The light around him grew brighter as the days passed. His skin looked healthier, his eyes sharper, his steps more intentional. Even the tone of his voice changed, deeper, steadier, more rooted in something solid. This stage, Jesus said, is where a man begins to reclaim his identity. Not the one society forced on him, not the one his mistakes created, but the one I designed before he ever took his first breath. Then Jesus said something that struck me deeply. Awakening is the first time a man realizes he is capable of becoming dangerous again, not to others, but to the darkness that once controlled him. The man stood taller now, his presence stronger, his spirit alert. He wasn't free yet, not fully, but he was awake. And an awake man is no longer easy to enslave. The room brightened until everything shimmered like sunlight reflecting on water. Jesus turned to me, his gaze filled with certainty. "Now," he said, "you will see what happens when an awakened man enters the battlefield within himself." And as the scene shifted around us once again, I felt a tension rising in my spirit, because the next stage wasn't calm. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't peaceful. It was war. When the light settled, everything around us shifted into motion, fast, violent, chaotic. It felt nothing like the last stage. There was no gentle awakening, no quiet realization. This place was alive with conflict. Flames flickered through shadows, whispers rose like wind, and there he was again, the same man, standing in the middle of it all, shaking, sweating, fists clenched. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with battle. And Jesus said, "This is the war within." I'd seen battles in my life. I'd fought a few of them myself. But nothing compared to what I saw now. It wasn't a war fought with swords or guns. It was fought inside his mind, his body, his spirit. Temptation appeared like dark figures circling him, each one carrying something familiar. Loneliness, stress, boredom, lust, exhaustion, old memories disguised as desires. They didn't attack outright. They whispered. They offered comfort. They offered escape. And the man trembled under the weight of it. Jesus stood beside him, not intervening, only watching. "Every man must fight this battle himself," he said calmly. "Not because I want him to suffer, but because this war strengthens what was once weak." The man paced back and forth, gripping his head as if trying to hold his thoughts together. His breathing was sharp, erratic, like a soldier cornered in battle. And every few seconds, those shadowed temptations lunged forward, trying to pull him back into the old habits that had enslaved him for years. For a moment, I saw him falter. His eyes darted toward the shadows, his hand reaching out as if hypnotized. And then he snapped back like someone slapped him awake. I felt that moment deep in my bones, the pull of what you know you must resist, the desire to fall just to stop the pressure. "This stage," Jesus said, "is where a man learns either to master himself or to surrender to the part of him trying to destroy him." The man dropped to his knees, shaking uncontrollably, forehead pressed to the ground. It wasn't surrender, it was desperation. "He cannot escape the urges completely," Jesus explained. "They come like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent." Waves began appearing around the man, crashing against him, soaking him in fear, anger, restlessness. But he clung to the floor, digging his fingers into the ground as if anchoring himself to his future. Then something extraordinary happened. The man slowed his breath. One inhale. One exhale. Deliberate. Intentional. He lifted his head, eyes burning with frustration but also determination. With each controlled breath, the waves weakened. With each refusal to fall, the shadows grew dimmer. "A man's breath," Jesus said, "is his first weapon. His discipline is the second. His purpose is the third." And I realized the war wasn't about temptation. The war was about who the man was becoming. Suddenly, images flashed around him, memories of past failures, late nights spent wasting himself, guilt eating away at him like rust. Each memory struck him like a blow to the chest. But something was different now. Instead of collapsing, he absorbed the hit. Instead of giving in, he steadied himself. "He is learning to separate desire from compulsion," Jesus said. "Learning that urges do not define him unless he obeys them." The shadows tried one final time, rushing toward him with a force that shook the entire space. They whispered lies, that he was weak, that he was broken, that change was pointless. His body tensed, his spirit strained, and for a moment I thought he would fall. But then, from somewhere inside him, perhaps the place where purpose is born, he let out a roar. Not loud, not violent, but a roar of refusal. A declaration that he would not return to who he once was. In that instant, the shadows shattered. The waves stopped. The entire battlefield fell silent. The man was trembling, exhausted, drenched in sweat, but he was still standing. Jesus looked at him with a depth of pride I could hardly understand. "This stage does not make him perfect," he said softly. It makes him dangerous, to the darkness that once owned him. And those words echoed through my chest like thunder. Then the battlefield dissolved into light again, but not the blinding kind, a warm, steady glow. The man collapsed to his knees, breathing slowly, painfully, but with relief. The war within, Jesus told me, is won not by never falling, but by rising faster, stronger, and with more wisdom each time. And as the light deepened around us, he added, "Now, witness what happens when a man begins to rewire his very being." The ground beneath us shifted, and a new scene began to take form. When the war-torn battlefield faded, it was replaced by something calmer, but not simple. The air felt electric, charged with potential, like the quiet moment before a thunderstorm. Jesus and I stood in what looked like a vast, living map of the human mind. Lines of light ran through the darkness like highways, some bright, some dim, some broken. And right at the center of it all stood the man, breathing slower now, calmer, but carrying the exhaustion of battle in his trembling shoulders. Jesus approached him, placing a hand near his back without touching. "This," he said, "is the rewiring." The word echoed through the strange space, and suddenly those glowing pathways around us responded, flickering, shifting, connecting. The man looked around, confused, as if seeing his own mind for the first time. And I realized something profound. A man's brain changes when he chooses self-control. Not metaphorically, literally, spiritually, physically. I watched as darkened pathways, the ones tied to lust, impulse, compulsion, began to dim even further, growing thin and brittle like old ropes losing their strength. Every time the man resisted temptation during the war, these dark paths weakened. And now, in this stage, they began to break. Freedom requires more than strength, Jesus said. It requires renewal. He gestured toward a dim, cracked neural path. This is where he used to fall. This is where he used to run from himself. Then something miraculous happened. New pathways began to glow with light, thin at first, then stronger, branching like roots sinking into fertile ground. They represented discipline, purpose, focus, presence, peace. Each decision the man had made, every no, every breath he controlled, every temptation he faced without surrender, had carved a new line in his brain. He is building the man he was meant to be, Jesus said. One choice at a time. The man put a hand to his chest, as if feeling something stir inside him. And he was. His hormones, his clarity, his emotional balance, all of it was aligning for the first time in years. When the seed is retained, Jesus explained, energy rises. Chemistry stabilizes. Vision sharpens. This is not superstition. It is design. I watched the man lift his head, his eyes calmer, clearer, brighter than any stage before. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was transforming. We saw flashes of his daily life, waking earlier, thinking more clearly, remembering details he used to forget. His voice sounded different, deeper, more grounded. When he spoke with intention, not distraction. When he walked with direction, not drift. He is becoming centered, Jesus said. His mind is learning to serve him instead of enslave him. And I felt a chill run through me, because I knew how rare that clarity had become in the modern world. Then Jesus showed me something even more beautiful. The man's emotions began to settle. The anxiety that once gnawed at him like a persistent shadow faded. The restlessness that kept him up at night softened. The despair that used to whisper lies in the dark began to lose its voice. The body heals, Jesus said, when the man stops draining what was meant to strengthen him. His confidence rises. His courage awakens. His identity stabilizes. The man stood taller now, shoulders back, breath deep, presence controlled. Even his aura, something I had never truly believed in, looked brighter, steadier, more defined. A man wired for purpose, Jesus said, is a man the world can no longer toss back and forth. And I could see it clearly. He wasn't simply avoiding sin anymore. He was becoming someone new. Someone anchored. Someone disciplined. Someone whole. But Jesus wasn't finished. He stepped forward, and the glowing map of the mind pulsed as if responding to his authority. This stage is powerful, he said. But it is not the end. Because once the mind changes, the world begins to notice. And the light around us shifted, not gently this time, but boldly, dramatically, like a curtain being pulled open on a new act of a long, difficult play. The man drew a slow breath, preparing himself without even knowing why. I could feel it too, an energy building, gathering, rising like a tide. Jesus looked at me, his eyes steady, almost knowing. "The rewired man becomes magnetic," he said. "And that is the next test." Everything around us dissolved into gold, and a new reality formed ahead. The golden light surrounding us felt different from any stage before it, heavier, deeper, almost royal. It wrapped around the man like a cloak, shifting and pulsing with an authority I could feel in my bones. He stood in the center of it, breathing slowly, steadily, his presence so grounded it seemed to anchor the entire space around him. Jesus watched him quietly, his expression solemn, almost reverent. "This," he said softly, "is the becoming." The man wasn't fighting anymore. He wasn't running from temptation or grappling with confusion. He simply was, centered, calm, rooted in something far beyond himself. His posture carried the weight of someone who had suffered, learned, rebuilt, and overcome. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but truly. His eyes were sharp and alive, yet gentle, as if he saw the world differently now, with clarity instead of craving, with purpose instead of panic. Jesus stepped closer to him, and the air vibrated faintly, like the hum of something divine. "A man reaches this stage," he said, "not by avoiding desire, but by mastering it." I watched as the man's aura expanded outward, calm, powerful, steady, the kind of presence that fills a room even before he speaks. You could tell he wasn't easily swayed anymore. Not by lust, not by distraction, not by the noise of the world. He had become someone capable of standing firm. A vision appeared around him, scenes from daily life. People turned when he walked into a room, not because he demanded attention, but because something about him commanded it naturally. He spoke fewer words, but each one seemed to carry weight. His family interacted with him differently, with respect, with interest, with trust. Even his silence felt strong. "When a man becomes aligned with purpose," Jesus said, "others feel it before they understand it." Then I saw something even deeper, the man alone in prayer. His thoughts no longer scattered, no longer choked by guilt or fog. He prayed with depth, not rush. With intention, not repetition. And it wasn't just prayer. It was communion. A connection. A conversation happening in the quiet of his soul. "The man who retains," Jesus said, "rebuilds the bridge between flesh and spirit." The world calls it discipline, but heaven calls it alignment. Memories from his past rose before him, mistakes, failures, regrets, but instead of shrinking from them, he faced them with compassion, almost with gratitude. "He has forgiven himself," Jesus whispered. "And that is one of the highest forms of strength." There was no pride in him now, no arrogance, no superiority. Just steadiness, humility, awareness of his own fragility and power at the same time. A rare balance no stage before had ever given him. As the man took a slow step forward, the golden light thickened, settling onto him like armor. Not armor that isolates, armor that strengthens. "This is the destiny," Jesus said, "of a man who chooses mastery over indulgence." And I could see it plainly. He had become someone capable of protecting, guiding, building, loving, not from exhaustion, but from overflow. His energy wasn't leaking anymore. It was radiating. But then Jesus's tone shifted, firm, serious, even warning. "This stage is powerful," he said, "but it is also dangerous." The man's aura flickered slightly, as if responding to the words. "Because with strength comes temptation of another kind, pride, judgment, spiritual superiority." Jesus looked directly into the man's eyes. If he forgets humility, everything he has built can collapse in a moment. Those words echoed heavily. A new vision unfolded, two paths in front of the man. One glowing bright, leading toward service, compassion, wisdom. The other darker, filled with admiration, ego, seduction, control. And the man stood at the crossroads, breathing slowly. "Becoming," Jesus said, "is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of responsibility." The light around the man thickened again, as if urging him to choose correctly. Finally, the golden veil began to dissolve, revealing the man standing strong, steady, whole, but aware that the journey had only just begun. Jesus turned to me, his voice echoing with eternity itself. "This," he said, "is the man the world tried to prevent him from meeting." And as the last of the golden light faded, he added, "What comes next is what few ever see, the warning." The scene darkened, preparing the way for a revelation I felt deep in my chest. A revelation that chilled me before I even saw it. The golden light vanished so abruptly that it felt like someone had ripped the sun out of the sky. What replaced it was not darkness, not entirely, but something colder, heavier, almost suffocating. The air thickened as if every breath carried the weight of thousands of broken stories. Jesus stood beside me, his expression no longer soft or instructive. It carried a gravity that made my heart tighten. "What you're about to see," he said, "is the cost of never awakening." As the space expanded, I saw them, silhouettes of men, hundreds, maybe thousands, all moving through a half-life. Their faces were drained, their shoulders slumped, their spirits small. They walked in circles, endlessly repeating the same gestures, picking up their phones, scrolling, hiding, giving in, collapsing. "These," Jesus whispered, "are the men trapped in the first 3 stages." There was no fire, no demons, no torment like the stories we hear, only emptiness. And somehow, that emptiness felt more terrifying. The men drifted like shadows, unaware of one another, unaware of themselves. One clutched his head in shame. Another collapsed in frustration. A third stared into nothing. They weren't being punished, they were wasting. "This is the enemy's strategy," Jesus said. "Not to destroy men with violence, but to drain them so quietly they do not notice they are dying spiritually." I felt a chill run through me. I had lived near this place before. Too close. A vision zoomed in on one particular man, younger than the others, maybe in his 20s. His eyes were sunken, his posture weak, his entire being dimmed. Every time he reached for purpose, something pulled him back. Every time he felt hope, a shadow smothered it. "Most men never escape this loop," Jesus said. "Not because they are evil, but because no one taught them they were in a battle." The words hit me like a hammer. Men weren't failing, they were unarmed. Then Jesus pointed toward a cluster of men stuck in stage 1, the wasting. They were slumped over, drained, barely able to lift their heads. "They live tired," he said. "They wake up tired. They go to work tired. Their dreams die, tired." I could almost hear the dull hum of numbness surrounding them. They weren't choosing defeat, they simply lacked the strength to rise. And for the first time in this journey, I felt anger burn in my chest. Nearby, stage 2 men wandered through their fog, bumping into invisible walls, unaware time was slipping through their fingers. "They think they are unmotivated," Jesus said. "But they are starved, mentally, physically, spiritually." And then stage 3 men, the chained ones, struggled in agonizing cycles, breaking for a moment only to fall back harder. Their shame echoed throughout the space like distant thunder. Jesus turned to me, his eyes sharp, almost piercing. "These men are not weak," he said. "They are wounded, and the world mocks the wounded instead of healing them." I felt something inside me crack, a realization I had ignored for most of my life. So many men I knew were carrying silent battles while everyone around them assumed they were lazy or careless. And yet here, in this vision, their struggle was painfully clear. No one escapes alone. Then Jesus lifted his hand, and the entire scene shook, the ground trembling beneath my feet. "This," he said, "is why I warned you." The silhouettes flickered, fading in and out, as if their very identities were dissolving. "If a man dies in these stages," Jesus continued, "he never discovers the one he was created to be." And that was the tragedy. Not hell, not fire, but a life unlived. A single tear slid down my face, something I hadn't felt in years. "Why show me this?" I whispered. Jesus answered softly but firmly, "Because men do not fear what they do not understand. And if they knew the truth, they would rise with urgency." The weight of his words pressed into me like a mantle being placed on my shoulders. This wasn't information. This was responsibility. Then the darkness thinned, replaced by a blinding flash of light. "You have more to see," Jesus said. Before you return, you must understand the cost of your own life, and the mission I am giving you." My breath caught. The warning wasn't just about them. It was also about me. And as the vision shifted once more, I felt a trembling inside my spirit. Something profound, and deeply personal, was coming next. The flash of light settled into a dim, solemn glow, not frightening, but heavy with meaning. I felt it before I saw anything, that sinking in the chest a man gets when he knows he can no longer hide. Jesus stood beside me, but this time, he wasn't showing me other men. He was showing me myself. An image of me appeared ahead, younger in some moments, older in others, as if every version of me were layered into one fragile frame. My knees went weak. I wasn't prepared for this. The room around us shifted into scenes from my life, not the ones I remembered proudly, but the ones I avoided even thinking about. Late nights filled with regret. Days I wasted, drifting through life like a man sleepwalking through his own purpose. Times when I broke promises to myself and blamed everything except the truth. "This," Jesus said softly, "is the weight of the years you surrendered." His voice wasn't condemning. It was sorrowful. And that hurt even more. I watched myself stumble through seasons where I could have risen. Opportunities one ignored, projects I started then abandoned, dreams I silenced because I thought I wasn't worthy of them. Each moment hit me like a hammer to the chest. "I gave you strength," Jesus said. "I gave you time. But you allowed the world to drain you." My throat tightened. I had no excuse. None. Just a lifetime of quiet self-betrayals disguised as routine. Then came the moments I truly feared, the nights when I gave in to temptation, knowing deep inside it emptied me, weakened me, eroded who I could have become. I saw myself afterward, tired, ashamed, promising it was the last time, then repeating the cycle again. Jesus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You fought the darkness alone," he said. "And no man overcomes a war he refuses to acknowledge." The truth pierced me deeper than any judgment ever could. A new scene emerged, me sitting alone in my bedroom, feeling that silent exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from wasting your own spirit. I saw myself aging faster, carrying a weight I couldn't explain. "Every time you drained yourself," Jesus said, "you dimmed the light I placed in you. Not because you were wicked, but because you were misled." His compassion made the pain even sharper. Judgment through love is far harder to endure. Then Jesus lifted his hand, and suddenly my entire life stretched out before me like a tapestry, each thread representing a choice. Some threads glowed. Many were faded. Some were broken entirely. "You were not meant to die this way," he said quietly. The words struck like thunder. "There was more in you, more strength, more purpose, more legacy, but you did not know how to claim it." I felt heat behind my eyes. No man wants to realize he lived below his potential. But then, in the middle of all that regret, Jesus showed me something unexpected, moments I forgot I'd done right. Times when I helped without being asked. Times when I spoke kindness into someone's pain. Times when I protected someone who needed it. "These," he said, touching the glowing threads, "were glimpses of the man I designed." My breath shook. I wasn't worthless. I simply wasn't finished. The images dissolved, leaving only one version of me standing in a bright circle of light, the man I could have become. Taller, sharper, more grounded. A man who lived with purpose instead of drifting. A man who led instead of hid. A man who used his strength to build, not escape. "This," Jesus said, "was always inside you." My heart broke and healed at the same time. I had been living as a shadow of this man. I looked at Jesus, trembling. If my life is over," I whispered, "why show me all of this?" His response was gentle, but powerful enough to shake the whole space. "Because your life is not over." The words wrapped around me like a lifeline, pulling me back from despair. "You will return," Jesus continued, "but not as who you were, as who you must become." And with those words, something inside me cracked open, a mixture of fear, hope, and responsibility. The light surrounding my life faded, replaced by the steady glow of Jesus' presence. "Your judgment," he said, "is not condemnation. It is awakening." And as the vision dissolved into brightness, I sensed something stirring deep inside me, A calling, a purpose, a mission I never imagined would be placed in the hands of someone like me. When the light dimmed again, the space around us shifted into something calmer, not peaceful, but full of expectation. I could feel it in the air, that quiet tension right before a destiny is spoken into existence. Jesus stood ahead of me, his presence steady, his gaze firm in a way that made my heart thump like a drum inside my chest. I knew something important was coming, something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. He stepped closer, not with softness this time, but with authority. "You are returning," he said, "because the world needs what you now know." I swallowed hard. Me? An old man who had wasted so much time, who had lived decades in fog and weakness. But Jesus knew my thoughts before I spoke them. "It is precisely because you were ordinary," he continued, "that men will listen. They trust the wounded more than the perfect." The space around us filled with faint echoes, voices of men from different generations, struggling silently through battles no one around them understood. I heard desperation, anger, shame, confusion. "They walk alone," Jesus said, "because they believe no one sees their suffering. No one understands their fight." Then he turned to me with a depth that pierced straight through my soul. "But you do, and that is why you will speak." Images appeared of men across the world, young, old, middle-aged, drowning in addiction, exhaustion, hopelessness. Each life I saw cut me deeper, because I recognized pieces of myself in every one of them. "Your story," Jesus said, "will be a torch in their darkness, not to shame them, but to guide them." I felt my breath tremble. The weight of what he was giving me wasn't punishment, it was purpose. He lifted his hand, and suddenly the 7 stages appeared around us like rings of light. "You will teach them what I showed you," he said. "You will show them the stages, so they can understand their battles and rise." I stared at those glowing stages, remembering each one: the wasting, the fog, the chains, the war, the rewiring, the becoming. The journey that nearly broke me now stood before me as a map for someone else's salvation. But then Jesus told me something that shook me: "Many will doubt you." The light flickered slightly as he continued. "Some will mock you. Some will dismiss you. Some will say an old man has no authority to speak on these things." He wasn't warning me out of fear. He was preparing me, strengthening me. "But the ones who need truth," he said, "will hear it. Their spirits will recognize the call." The space shifted, revealing a vision of me, older, yes, but standing tall, speaking with a clarity I had never possessed in life. Men gathered around me, not because I demanded attention, but because they sensed authenticity. They saw scars. They saw survival. They saw truth. "Your mission," Jesus said, "is not to convince the world. It is to reach the men who are ready." My throat tightened. What if I fail? I whispered. It was the most human question I had ever asked. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, warm, steady, carrying strength I didn't have on my own. "You will stumble," he said. "All men stumble. But you will not fail, because I am sending you." And hearing that broke something inside me, the belief that my life had been meaningless. The space brightened again, filling with the same golden glow from before. "You will return with fire," Jesus said. "Not the fire of anger or pride, but the fire of awakening." I felt that fire inside me, small, new, but alive, burning, growing. "And every man you reach," he continued, "will carry a piece of that fire into his own life. That is how transformation begins." Then, with a seriousness that made the entire space tremble, Jesus said the words that sealed my purpose. "You are not going back to live. You are going back to lead." And as those words settled in my spirit, I knew whatever came next would change everything. When Jesus' words faded, the light around us began to collapse inward, folding like a curtain being pulled at the end of a divine performance. For the first time since my heart stopped, I felt something tugging at me, not spiritually, but physically. A heavy pull, like gravity remembering I belonged somewhere else. "It is time," Jesus said, and his voice carried both comfort and command. I didn't want to leave, not yet, but I knew I had no choice. The world around us burst into a swirl of white, rushing past me like wind in a storm. My body felt weightless, then unbearably heavy, then numb. I tried calling out to Jesus, but my voice didn't work anymore. I felt myself slipping through layers of light, drifting toward the distant, muffled sound of machines. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Silence. Stillness. Darkness. Then a single sound, a long, drawn-out beep. Voices echoed somewhere above me. "He's not responding. We're losing him again." But I wasn't inside my body yet. I hovered somewhere between worlds, aware but unable to move. I could feel hands pressing on my chest, could hear the frantic tremor in the nurse's voice, could sense the cold metal of the hospital table beneath me. And then Jesus's final whisper came, soft and close to my ear, "Breathe." And just like that, I burst back into myself. My lungs expanded with a violent gasp, burning like fire. My eyes shot open, but the light was too bright. Nurses jumped back in shock. One of them screamed for a doctor. Another grabbed my wrist, checking my pulse like she didn't believe it was real. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, each beat echoing like a hammer inside a canyon. My entire body trembled, as if waking from centuries of sleep. They kept calling my name, asking if I could hear them, but all I could think about was the transition, the feeling of slipping through death like a thin veil. I felt the weight of air entering my lungs, the sting of cold metal against my back, the warmth of a nurse's hand gripping mine. Life, real life, felt heavier than I remembered. "You were gone," the doctor said breathlessly. 6 minutes. No heartbeat. His voice shook as he added, "And then you just came back." I tried to speak, but my throat burned like sandpaper. The first attempt came out as a whisper, the second as a breath, and the third. "I saw him." The entire room froze. Nurses exchanged glances, the kind that said they'd heard this 100 times from dying patients, but still didn't know what to do with it. A doctor placed a mask over my face and said gently, "Just breathe. We'll talk later." But they couldn't understand. Breathing wasn't what saved me. Obedience was. Hours passed in a daze. I drifted in and out, hearing pieces of conversations. "His brain should be damaged. We need to run more scans." He woke with full cognitive response. But every time I opened my eyes, all I saw was the memory of Jesus standing in the light, the 7 stages glowing behind him. My spirit felt fuller, heavier, like something sacred had been poured into it. My body, though fragile, felt strangely renewed. When the room finally emptied, I stared at the ceiling, cold, white, unfamiliar, and whispered to myself, "Why me?" The question wasn't about fear anymore. It was about purpose. Jesus didn't send me back without reason. He didn't drag me through death just to live quietly again. I felt it in my bones. I had work to do, men to reach, truth to share, a mission carved deep into the center of my soul. Later that night, alone in the dark hospital room, I lifted my trembling hands and saw something I hadn't seen in years: steadiness. Not physical steadiness, spiritual steadiness. My fingers no longer shook from shame or exhaustion. My breath no longer raced from anxiety. My heart no longer collapsed under its own weight. Something had been rewired inside me, aligned, awakened. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I won't waste this life again." And for the first time in decades, the vow didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. Because I hadn't just come back to life. I had come back different. And as I drifted into sleep, I felt the echo of Jesus's words. "You are not going back to live. You are going back to lead." The first morning after leaving the hospital felt strange, almost unreal. The air outside tasted different, sharper, cleaner, as if the world itself had shifted while I was gone. I stood on my porch, holding the railing with both hands, feeling the wood beneath my palms as if touching something for the very first time. And in that quiet dawn, I made myself a promise. I would never go back to the man I used to be. Not after everything I had seen. Not after meeting him. My old routines tried to creep back in. The sluggish mornings. The tired excuses. The restless hands searching for distraction. But I recognized them now. Every shadow, every whisper, every habit that once pulled me into darkness. It was strange. The temptation hadn't disappeared, but its disguise had. I could see it clearly, like a predator stepping out from behind a bush. And once you see the teeth, You can't pretend they're not there anymore. So I changed everything. Slowly at first, painfully slowly, but deliberately. I cleaned my house room by room, tossing out years of clutter, memories, regrets, even clothing that reminded me of seasons I never wanted to relive. It felt symbolic, like dusting off a version of myself that had been asleep. My body resisted at times. Old age doesn't make transformation gentle. But every ache reminded me I was alive, truly alive, and pain is a small price for rebirth. I found myself waking earlier than I ever had before, not because I forced it, but because something inside me was eager, hungry, focused. I began walking each morning, breathing deeply, letting the silence settle in my bones. With every step, I could feel that new fire inside me growing, small but steady, the way a lantern begins to glow before sunrise. And every time an old thought tried to drag me back, I simply whispered, "Not anymore." One night, temptation hit me harder than I expected, out of nowhere, like a storm on a clear day. The kind of temptation that used to crush me. My legs felt weak, my mind clouded, old patterns whispering, "Just this once." But I didn't fall. I stood still, breathed slow, and remembered the battlefield Jesus had shown me. I remembered the chains. I remembered the darkness of stage 1. And I said to myself, I have survived death. I will not be defeated by habit. That moment broke something powerful inside me, the myth that I was weak. All my life, I thought strength was about never being tempted. Now I understood, strength is what you choose while being tempted. And that night, for the first time in decades, I chose myself. Not my impulses. Not my anxiety. Not my shame. Myself. It felt like reclaiming land the enemy had stolen from me long before I even knew I was in a war. I began rebuilding my relationships too. Calling people I had pushed away. Apologizing where I had been silent. Speaking honestly where I once hid behind pride or fear. Some conversations were awkward, some painful, some emotional. But something remarkable happened. People listened. They looked at me differently. "You seem different," they'd say, trying to find words. And I would smile gently, knowing they were sensing the rewiring Jesus had shown me. Even my family noticed. My son told me, "You stand taller now." My grandchildren hugged me longer. My friends asked how I suddenly looked healthier, younger, more alive. I didn't preach. I didn't lecture. I simply carried the transformation inside me, letting it speak louder than words ever could. A man who changes, Jesus had said, becomes a living message. And I saw the truth of that every day. But the real shift happened inside my spirit. Prayer became natural. Purpose became clearer. My mind, once filled with fog, felt sharp, focused, grounded. I no longer lived in shame, or fear, or exhaustion. I lived in intention. Every step, every breath, every moment was a choice. A sacred one. And each time I chose discipline over indulgence, I felt the man from the golden light stepping closer to reality. And so I made a decision, one that would change everything. I would not keep what I experienced to myself. If Jesus pulled me out of death and showed me the stages so vividly, it wasn't just to save me. It was to prepare me. And as that realization settled into my spirit, I knew the final chapter of this journey wasn't about survival at all. It was about obedience. In the quiet of my home, long after the hospital lights and the noise of the world faded, the weight of everything Jesus showed me began to settle. Not like a burden, more like a mantle. A responsibility stitched into my soul. I sat at my old kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from a cup of tea, and the same realization kept echoing inside me. I didn't survive death for myself. I survived it for someone else. Someone out there who needed this message more than I ever did. Jesus' voice, though distant now, still rang inside me with absolute clarity. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them what I showed you." At first, I wondered how. Who was I, an aging man with a frail heart and a lifetime of mistakes, to speak on something this profound? But then I remembered what he said back in that golden light. Men trust the wounded more than the flawless. And the truth is, I was wounded. But I wasn't broken anymore. That is what he wanted me to share. I closed my eyes and saw the 7 stages again, not as visions this time, but as realities etched into my memory. Not mystical, not abstract, but painfully human. The wasting, the fog, the chains, the war, the rewiring, the becoming, and finally, the responsibility that follows. These weren't just steps of self-control. They were steps of rebirth. Steps that lead a man back to the identity the world tries to strip from him every single day. Jesus' final message to me came not as thunder, but as something quieter, gentler, like truth speaking directly to my bones. Retention is not about withholding. It is about transforming. He said those words slowly, deliberately, as if carving them into the deepest part of my being. Every man who learns to govern his desire, he added, will learn to govern his life. That sentence struck me harder than any sermon I'd ever heard in my entire life. I saw flashes of men everywhere. Young men, old men, fathers, sons, husbands, lonely men, broken men, all fighting the same invisible war. Some in silence, some in shame, some in denial. And for the first time, I understood why Jesus insisted I return. Not because I was strong, not because I was holy, not because I deserved anything, but because I survived what many men don't even recognize they are dying from. So I speak now to whoever hears this, whether you're listening out of curiosity, desperation, or disbelief. You are not weak. You are not hopeless. You are not broken beyond repair. What you feel, that exhaustion, that emptiness, that fog, it is not your identity. It is just the stage you're in. And stages can be passed. Chains can be broken. Fog can be cleared. Waste can be restored. I've seen it happen. I watched it with my own eyes, inside myself. Jesus showed me that men today are starving for strength, purpose, clarity, and dignity. But they keep searching for it in places that drain them instead of filling them. Screens, escapes, habits they don't understand. The world tells you pleasure will free you, but Jesus showed me pleasure is the very thing that enslaves you when you don't control it. Your seed, your energy, your desire, it was never meant to be wasted. It was meant to build you. And so here I am, an old man who died and came back, telling you the truth he commanded me to share. You are capable of becoming more than the world expects, more than your past suggests, more than your failures whisper in the dark. The man you are searching for, the one you think you lost, the one you fear you'll never become, he is still inside you, waiting, calling, fighting to rise. But transformation requires a decision. The same decision I had to make when I opened my eyes in that hospital bed. Do you remain the man who drifts? Or do you become the man who leads? Jesus didn't show me the stages so I could admire them. He showed me so I could warn you, and guide you, and remind you of the power He placed inside your body, your mind, and your spirit. So if you're listening, truly listening, then hear this last part clearly. Rise. Not tomorrow. Not one day. Because once you begin the journey, even imperfectly, your entire life will rise with you. If you stayed with me until the very end, then something inside you was meant to hear this. Maybe it was a whisper. Maybe it was a wound. Maybe it was the memory of the man you once hoped to become. I didn't come back from death to impress you. I came back because there is a war inside every man, a war most of them don't even know they're fighting. A war that steals their strength, their purpose, their clarity, their spirit. And now I ask you, honestly, quietly, man to man, how long will you live trapped in the wrong stage? How long will you let screens consume your spark? How long will you let pleasure drain the power God tried to give you? How long will you pretend you're fine, when your spirit is begging you to rise? Have you ever wondered, why am I always tired? Why can't I focus? Why do I feel like I'm wasting my life? What if the answer is simple? What if you're not broken, just disconnected from the man you were born to be? Jesus showed me the 7 stages because every man walks through one of them, even the ones who laugh at this message, even the ones who mock retention, even the ones who pretend they don't feel hollow inside. But here's the truth no one ever told me. You can choose. Not tomorrow. Not one day. If you rise, even shaking, heaven rises with you. If you resist, even for a moment, the chains weaken. If you choose to become who God designed you to be, the world cannot stop you. So here is my final question, the one Jesus pressed into my heart. Will you stay the man who destroys you? Or will you finally become the man who frees you? If this story awakens something in you, even a spark, then don't walk away. Stay here. Walk with us. Grow with us. Fight with us. Click like, subscribe, turn on notifications. Not for me, but because you shouldn't fight this war alone. I died once. I saw what men lose when they sleep through their purpose. And I came back for one reason. Your battle is holy, and your future is far greater than you think.